That was beautiful. Thank you so much. We appreciate having Dennis and Linda here, and we know they'll be going back to Maryland soon. And appreciate that he filled in for Tony. Wasn't that convenient?
I locked him in the laundry room.
Oh, okay. Tony needed to go to be with his mom and dad and see to their care. And Dennis and Linda are in town, and wasn't that convenient that he could fill in for Tony. We appreciate it. I think that's a song that you introduced to us here at Unity of Gulfport several years ago, Dennis. I was thinking that as you were performing. Beautiful, beautifully done. For those of you that are new to Unity, I'd like to speak just a moment about what we teach here. And that is that there is one power and one presence in the universe. That power is all-loving. We have traditionally called that power God. But if you prefer to call that power another name, that's up to you. It's hard to get out of the habit of saying another word. If I know what I'm speaking of when I speak of God, I'm speaking of that all-loving power. And many people say Mother, Father, God, and it is the feminine and the masculine energy. We also believe that we each have an ability to connect with that power. And it is through prayer and meditation that we connect with God. And without that, we cannot enhance our intuition, knowing. And we also believe that our powers, our thoughts create. So we keep our thoughts positive. And that's the principle I'm going to talk about this morning. I'm going to talk about that a little bit with cause and effect. But the fifth principle, before I get into that, is that we believe that we must walk the talk. It's not good enough to just speak these principles and what you believe and then go out in the world and do whatever you want to do all week long. We must walk the talk. So Alan Cohen says, mind is the cause, everything else is the effect. Now we would change that a little bit now. We would say the mind and feeling that we put into it, because we know that the more emotion we put into something, the more effect that our thoughts have. But there's a lot of truth in that. I grew up in a world where I was taught there was a God out there somewhere, and that God, although we were told that God was loving, we were told that God was pretty judgmental. And so we might fall into a point of blaming or shaming or not taking responsibility for our lives. If we felt like everything in our lives was turned over to God, then we might not take responsibility for our own lives. And that is one thing that we do teach here at Unity, is that we take full responsibility for our own lives. You may have learned to fear or blame or judge others and to not take responsibility for your lives. You may have even adopted a victim mentality. And we know how far that'll take you, don't we? Not very far. So you may have even said, when you get that type of belief, you might say the system is against me. I can't ever get ahead. That's another thought you might have. Those with money seem to get all the breaks, and so forth. You might have fallen into all sorts of disempowering thoughts. So when you moved into a thought system or a belief system like Unity, you would have been taught to step up to the plate as an empowered spiritual being. Now, I had this little story that my husband told, and it's kind of funny, but I was going to try to tell it to you this morning, and I couldn't remember all the details. And so I finally said, well, you know, Dan, that's just going to fall flat if I try to tell that. So maybe you should tell it and to get the point across. But it's definitely about cause and effect, so pay attention.
This is unusual for me to speak. She won't let me speak. There's an old saying that he who analyzes every situation completely before taking a step spends all of his life on one leg. Or analysis paralysis, which a lot of people have. Okay? That's sort of one end of the spectrum. On the other end of the spectrum is saying, not thinking about what the consequences are of your actions. So there was a guy showed up at the hospital in the emergency room, and he had 2 broken legs. He has cuts all over his body. He had a crushed right hand. He had a big gash in his skull and his scalp, and he had a fractured skull and was unconscious. Well, they took him in. They set both of his legs. They patched up his body the best they could. They got his hand ready for surgery the next day, and they sewed up his scalp, put him in ICU, and waited until the next morning when he was conscious. And the hospital needed to find out what in the world happened to this guy. And so they went in and they said, you know, what happened? He said, well, you see, I'm a bricklayer. And you know, they're remodeling that building downtown, and I had the job of building the fireplace on the 3rd floor. You know, and it was getting late in the day, and everybody else went home, and I wanted to finish up because I only had a couple more hours of work, so I finished laying all the brick and looked down, and I had all these brick left over, and I thought, dang, the elevator's broken, and I'm going to have to carry these brick down 3 flights of stairs, and it's going to take me hours to get all these brick down there. And he said, I looked over there, and here's this big beam laying on the floor, and I stuck that beam out the window, and I secured the other end, and I got a big pulley and put on one end of that beam, found this big rope and put it through that pulley till both ends were hanging on the ground. And he said, I walked down those 3 flights of stairs, went and got my truck, backed it up to the window, got a barrel out of the back end of the truck, tied it to that rope, pulled it up to the window, tied the other end off to my truck bumper, went upstairs, put all those extra brick in that barrel, cleaned up my site, picked up my tools, walked down 3 flights of stairs, put my tools in the truck, went over, grabbed that rope with my right hand, unhooked it from the truck, and he said instantly, I was flying up towards the 3rd story building, the 3rd story window, because I had a 400-pound barrel on one end of the rope and a 150-pound barrel on the other end of the rope. And he said, my flight up to that 3rd story window was stopped immediately when my hand rammed into that pulley along with that rope, therefore crushing my right hand. He said, luckily I kept my senses and I remembered to hang on to the rope, or else I'd fallen 3 stories to my death. But he says, the bad news was when the barrel hit the ground, it knocked the bottom out of the barrel and all the bricks fell out of the barrel. Now I've got a 40-pound barrel on one end of the rope and a 150-pound barrel on the other end of the rope. And he said, I immediately started falling to my death. And he said, but luckily halfway down, I went right through the center of that barrel. And that's the reason I have all these cuts all over my body. And he said, and it slowed me down enough that I didn't fall to my death. But I was still going fast enough that when I hit the ground, I broke both my legs. And he said, the pain was so bad that I just lost all train of thought and I let loose of the rope. And now I got a 40-pound barrel on one end of the rope and nothing on the other end of the rope. And he says, my concussion and the cuts in my scalp are quite evident. And he said, but the good thing is, he says, the job was done. All the bricklayer on the ground next to my truck. And he said, and I learned a great lesson. Never, never, never let loose of that rope.
Well, he started telling me that, and I said, I'll never remember all that. Never. So this morning, we're talking about the laws of cause and effect. Everything is energy. Everything in the world is energy. And there is a cause, and there is an effect. Now, I'm going to talk for a minute about the fact that there are some other things that happen sometimes that maybe you didn't cause, but there's always an outcome to every thought. Everything that you do, there is an outcome. We're going to talk about that for a moment. There could be some underlying issues we haven't thought of whenever we make a decision like that. And like the man that he just talked about. And then the other thing I guess I just wanted to talk with you about before we finish here today is, are you willing to change? Are you willing to change? And that's one of the things I think that I've run into some people sometimes, and they'll have all sorts of chaos in their lives, and they're never, though, will they consider changing something. I know I ran into somebody once last year, and he said that he buys lottery tickets all the time with the hope of winning the lottery. But he said, there's something really funny. When I check those numbers and I didn't win, every single time I say a sigh of relief, because I realize how much work that would be if I did win. And I said, well, have you considered not buying any more tickets if you realize that? And he said, well, no, I'm not at that point yet, because I still think somewhere in my training, somewhere in my conscious thoughts, I think that I would want to win the lottery, but unconsciously, subconsciously, I must not. And I think that's one of the things that happens to us, is that so much of our lives are decided from our subconscious or unconscious behaviors. We may consciously say affirmations all the time, but if we've got a vibe underneath somewhere that's not wanting that success, or somewhere it was programmed. Did you know that from the time of our birth till our 7th year is when we're programmed? You know that, right? Even if you don't remember that you were programmed, you got all your programming then. And so a lot of what we do all the time comes from that programming. And unless you bring it to your consciousness, unless you bring it to your awareness, you are going to continue with the same old thing. The same old, maybe it's chaos that you have in your lives. And chaos is a symptom, and it is a result of living out of sync with the universe. Now, there's something that a spiritual teacher his name is Stuart Wilde. It's really quite funny. In this book, The 3 Keys to Self-Empowerment, he talks about the Strugglers Hall of Fame and the Strugglers Hit Parade. And I just want you to see if you can recognize any of these in your lives. And do you ever look at the same old story running through your life all the time? Same old drama, stress, blame, financial problems. Just like the fellow that was buying the lottery ticket each week, he really couldn't afford. And I said, well, why don't you take that $20 and just put it in a savings account? You'd be able to go someplace, travel sometime next year if you did that. And I've observed that with a lot of people with their budgets too, is that a lot of cause and effect just comes down to common sense. We will think this $20 over here and this $20 here and this $30 here and whatever, that they don't add up. They're just small. But the truth is they do. And that's part of cause and effect too. I mean, if you've got more coming out than you have coming in, then you have a cause and effect right there of why you're in poverty and you're not ever going to get out of it. And I'm amazed at the really intelligent people that I talk to that don't ever get that. I don't think we have anybody in this room that falls into that category, but if so, or someone online does, just make a note of that. What about cause and effect? One of the greatest lessons we've ever had in that, and I'm just going to remind a lot of you here this morning because we've studied this together. One of the greatest lessons on cause and effect comes from the book, The Quest. We've studied it before. It was a book written years ago in the early 90s, I believe, by the Jaffalas Unity teachers. And there are 50 lessons in it, and Lyndon Dennis taught it. The lessons, we took a class and were in class every week. And one of the greatest chapters in this book, and we have several of these over in the other building, is cause and effect. And I was just reading some of their words about it. It's just amazing. Some of the words were some I had already written down. They say there are no exceptions. What it comes down to is this: every thought, feeling, word, and action, without exception, is a cause which sets into motion an eventual effect. The law is immutable. And the cause can be as small as a fleeting sense of anxiety over a physical symptom. Now, what Dan talked about this morning was certainly the physical laws of cause and effect. But what we talk about here at Unity a lot are the metaphysical outcomes of this same principle. Your thoughts. There's one thing I know for certain: if I have negative thoughts, I'm going to live a life of negativity, right? Anybody ever notice that? The more positive you keep your thoughts, the more positive life you'll live. One of the other things that we teach metaphysically too, you can heal your life. Along with the traditional methods of medicine, we also encourage you to speak to every single cell in your body. Every single cell in your body. You could do nothing more important than every morning you say to every cell in your body, you are healed and whole. And I remember years ago they used to use that little symbol of a Pac-Man running around eating. Just visualize that. If there's a little bad guy, a germ, you think you've got strep throat or something else, see that little bad guy, that Pac-Man with the mouth running around. And that's certainly a good visualization too, and you can feel it. Feel that. As a matter of fact, in that field of cell biology now, they are beginning to see that if we can change our way of thinking and programming, we can actually change our health. We can change a diagnosis. We can change a condition. Now, I want to talk a minute about practical ways that we teach cause and effect, and we see that in the world every day. And then the metaphysical ways too. If you plant a tomato seed, you're not expecting to grow an eggplant, are you? You're not. Isn't that funny? But when it comes to our thoughts, we think differently, don't we? We become negative so quickly. Oh, I think I'll turn in an application for this job, but I know I'll never get it. We say in the background, I just know I won't get that. I just know I won't have any success. I just know this won't work out for me. Nothing ever does. I know that I can't quit that addiction because it has this power over me. But I'll tell you something. It doesn't. If you will engage with God, that one power and that one presence in the universe of which we spoke earlier, that divine power, you can overcome anything. Anything you can overcome. So if you're careless, you might fall and break something really important, right? That's cause and effect. I was being careless that morning, running around, rushing around, doing everything I could to, not be careful. And what did I do? Broke some bones. Never broken any bones in my entire life. But, I made the best of it. After that, I said, okay, I think the universe is trying to tell me to rest. I may have been careless, but it's holiday season. I guess I'll rest instead of being out running around doing a lot of things that won't matter later. How about that? So if there's a problem with many of us, though, that we're not aware, as I said earlier, that our subconscious is at work. And now the law of cause and effect. You may be thinking, well, not everything I caused. And that's true. But someone did. Someone else in the universe. And you can think about that the way you want to. You may be walking down the street and a car jumps the curb and hits you. You didn't cause that, did you? So we do live in a universe where there are a whole lot of people creating, and not just us. And but it may not be as random as we think either. But one of the things we have to do is that we have to be aware of when we are creating and when we're not creating. And I want you to think about this just for a moment. Does anybody have any struggling going on in their lives right now? Any type of struggling going on? Same old story, different day. I know one thing that happens to people is that they can have toxic relationships. And whether it's a significant other or a friend or whatever. Their relationships can be toxic, and they'll wonder, why in the world does this happen to me? Well, you apparently are sending out a vibe where you are attracting all of that. Now, what are you going to change? What are you going to change within you that will change that? What are you going to do to change all the drama in your life, the stress? Maybe you're blaming others. Maybe you're shaming yourself. And so as we look at all these ways that we may be sabotaging ourselves, we'll just ask us to look this morning at some of the concrete ways that we might change. It's not just actions. Whether or not we have a good, productive day sometimes depends upon what we woke up thinking that morning and what we allowed ourselves to keep thinking. So our thoughts, our feelings, processing a situation, whether or not we're going to change it. And I know this morning that most of you, we've been with these teachings for so long that we have been in the process of looking at our thoughts, looking at our behaviors, looking at the outcome. You don't need anybody to remind you of that. But as you take what I've said this morning, I would just ask you to be aware in every relationship in your life. Be aware with your jobs. Whether you're going for a different job, whether you're applying for a job, whatever it is you're doing, what is it? What behavior, what thought, what pattern do I continually do that brings up a result that I don't want? You can change that. I know that even if we feel like there's so many things we have no control over, yet we do. There's so many things with the medical industry we feel like we have no control over. Oh, well, I've got this appointment with this doctor. I know when I go in there, I'm going to be there 3 hours. We'll do a little research, find a different doctor, find a different caregiver, and change that. Do everything you can to change something that you complain about. Because when you complain, you're just sending more negative vibes down into your body. Now, Matt's not here today. He's gone to a convention of people that have made it really big in their businesses, and he's gone to be with them. It's a business he has in common with several of them. And they just get all hyped up and stay positive. And he's our cheerleader here. And he's not here this morning, but he is the positive thought guru now. If you want an example of somebody that continually picks himself up and gets going again, that would be Matt. I have a friend that wants to write a book. And every time I see her, she'll bring it up. And I'll say, well, how are you going with the book? After she's brought it up, I do not bring it up to her because I know it's a sore subject. Well, I know I'm supposed to write a book, and I'll pick it up and I'll write a little bit and then I'll put it down, she'll say, and I don't know how to get motivated about that. And what I would say to her is, because that's not my job to tell someone what their purpose is or what they should be doing with their lives. I don't know if they've got a book in them or not. Only they know that. But I do know if you have something that concerns you or worries you, it's always niggling in there, and that's not doing you any good. It's like having a fitness program. It's only as good as the actions you take. I may want to be fit and whole, but if I don't go out and do those things that I said I was going to do, what good is it? And the other bad thing is that it's causing you some angst and some worry and so maybe the thing you ought to address, instead of the desire to be fit and whole, is that really for me? And if not, then let it go. And be happy with your life, because I can guarantee you, if you're worried just a little bit, it's going to damage those cells in your body that we were talking about earlier. If you're overdoing and you're doing things you don't want to do, you say yes to too many meetings and you don't want to go, you go anyway. Guess what? It's going to damage some of those cells that we were talking about earlier. Guaranteed. Guaranteed. So if you have something you want to heal from, you can. You can. So here's the bottom line of cause and effect this morning. You must be aware of those things that you want to create in your life. If it's health and wholeness, be honest with yourself and look at how you might be sabotaging yourself. And if it isn't and you're happy with your life, then let it go. If it's to have a strong partnership with someone, look at the things you're doing. If you're staying in the house, never coming out, well, you're not going to meet anybody. And if you're meeting somebody at the bar and then you wonder why you had a toxic relationship, well, for heaven's sakes, honesty, reflect on some of the decisions you've made, decide what it is that is important to you. Let go of some of those things that are not adding to your health and wholeness. Release them and let them go. And then begin again any day that you want to. We're still in the new year. This is still January. It feels like it's been a long month, but it is still January. Begin again. Make a new commitment with God and sign it. When you get home today, make a new covenant. Here's what I'm going to do with my life. Charles Fillmore made several covenants over the years of his life. He died in his 90s, and he had made several. He's one of the founders of the Unity movement. He had made several covenants earlier in their lives, and then he thought he was finished and found that even, in his early 90s, he was still learning, and he encouraged all of us to do that. I may have a different commitment this time next year than I have today. We're evolving and hopefully becoming happier and more peaceful with every single day of our lives. I appreciate your being here today. Appreciate you coming out in this cold weather. And we know that the warm weather is coming. Appreciate your being at Unity of Gulfport, and I thank you for your time.